Welcome, restless dreamer. You've just stepped into the shadows of sleep, where stories whisper and the darkness listens. I'm your guide tonight, your voice in the void, here to lead you gently into nightmares wrapped in lullabies. Before we begin, press like if you're brave enough, and subscribe for more midnight tales that blur the line between sleep and terror. Tell me in the comments, where are you watching from, and what hour has found you? I'd always thought of myself as cautious, maybe even paranoid, when it came to selling things online. My dad used to warn me about scams, about people showing up with fake checks or trying to haggle you into a corner. But I figured, hey, it's just a car. A silver SUV I'd owned for years. Nothing flashy. The worst that could happen would be a low-ball offer, right? When I finally decided to sell, I cleaned it up as best I could, vacuumed the carpets, wiped the dust from the dashboard, even scrubbed the stubborn rust streaks around the wheel wells. It wasn't perfect, but it looked decent enough in the pictures I took for the ad. I posted it late on a Wednesday night, set the price fair, and went back to scrolling on my phone without another thought. The first 2 days were quiet, except for the predictable spam. I almost forgot the ad was even up until Saturday afternoon, when a message pinged through. Hi, is the SUV still available? Finally, a real buyer. We exchanged a few texts. His name was Evan, he said. Worked in a warehouse not far from my place. He seemed polite enough, though his sentences were short and oddly stiff, like someone who wasn't used to texting. Still, I couldn't afford to be picky. I suggested meeting at a grocery store parking lot. It was big, well lit, and covered in security cameras. He agreed without hesitation, which put me a little more at ease. That evening, I drove to the lot, parked under the yellow glow of a light pole, and texted him. I'm here, silver SUV near the loading docks. The reply came back instantly. Got it. Driving over now. A few minutes later, a black sedan pulled up across from me. A man stepped out. Late 20s maybe. Lean build, baseball cap pulled low over his eyes. He smiled faintly as he approached, but it didn't reach his eyes. You must be Evan, I said. Yeah, SUV looks good, he said, giving me a quick handshake. His grip was dry, almost too light, and for some reason, it unsettled me. He walked around the car, peeking inside the windows, running his hand over the frame as if testing its weight. Runs okay? He asked. Yeah, reliable, I said. Want to take it for a spin? He nodded and slid into the driver's seat. My father's voice echoed in my head. Never let someone drive off without you. So I climbed into the passenger side. At first it was normal. He pulled out of the lot carefully, asked about mileage and maintenance, nodded at my answers. But instead of circling the neighborhood, like most buyers would, he steered us onto an unfamiliar industrial road, where streetlights thinned and shadows seemed to press against the windows. You know this area? I asked. Yeah, he muttered, eyes fixed on the road. The silence grew heavy. My hands curled against my knees. He slowed as we passed a boarded-up factory, its windows black and broken. Then he turned into a cracked lot choked with weeds. Why here? I asked, my voice tighter than I intended. Just want to check something real quick, he said, cutting the engine. That was when I saw it. A van parked deeper in the lot, its headlights off. I hadn't noticed it until now, but the moment I did, my stomach dropped. 2 silhouettes sat inside, unmoving. Evan slipped the key out of the ignition and stepped out of the SUV. Go ahead and hop out, he said. His tone was casual, but there was a sharpness beneath it, a blade hidden in the words. My throat went dry. Why? Just get out, he said louder. The van's doors opened. 2 men climbed out, broad-shouldered, moving toward us with purpose. One adjusted something under his jacket that made my pulse hammer in my ears. It clicked then. This wasn't about buying a car, and I was in the middle of nowhere, alone, with 3 strangers who clearly didn't mean well. My brain lit up with panic, but somewhere in the chaos, one thought surfaced. The spare key. I always carried it in my pocket whenever I showed the SUV. a habit I never thought I'd need. The two men from the van were halfway across the lot, their footsteps echoing faintly in the night air. Evan rounded toward my side of the SUV, his expression tense now, his jaw tight. "Out," he repeated. I didn't move. My hand slid quietly into my pocket, fingers wrapping around the jagged ridges of the key. "Look, man, if you don't like the car," I began, but he yanked on the handle. Locked. That was my opening. I lunged across the console, jammed the spare key into the ignition, and twisted hard. The SUV roared to life. Evan froze, surprise flashing in his eyes. Then his hand darted into his pocket. I didn't wait to see what he was reaching for. I slammed the gear shift into drive and floored it. Gravel sprayed as the tires bit into the cracked pavement. Evan jumped back, cursing. The two men shouted something I couldn't make out, their dark forms growing smaller in the rear view as I barreled toward the exit. The van's headlights flared to life. Shit! They peeled out after me, engine growling, their beams cutting swaths of light across the empty road. My SUV wasn't new, but it still had muscle, and adrenaline sharpened my reflexes. I swerved around potholes, pushed the pedal harder, heart jackhammering in my chest. The rearview mirror showed their van closing the distance. My mouth went dry, throat raw from shallow breaths. I veered onto a side road, tires squealing, the SUV swaying dangerously before straightening. Streetlights returned, scattering the dark, but the van followed relentlessly. Think. I spotted a gas station up ahead, its fluorescent lights buzzing like a beacon. I pulled hard into the lot, skidding to a stop near the pumps. A man inside the station turned, startled. The van slowed as it approached, then rolled past without stopping. For a long moment, I sat gripping the wheel, trembling so badly I thought I might shake apart. The clerk came outside, asking if I was okay. I muttered something about car trouble, not trusting my voice. Only when the van's taillights disappeared completely did I finally breathe again. Back at my apartment, I sat in the driver's seat for what felt like hours, the engine ticking as it cooled, replaying everything in my head. The texts, the smile that never reached his eyes, the van waiting like a spider in its web. I called the police, gave them the details, the plate number I'd memorized in those frantic seconds before flooring it. They took the report, told me they'd look into it. But deep down, I knew. People like that didn't just vanish because of one failed attempt. For days after, I felt watched. Every unfamiliar car that slowed near my apartment made my chest tighten. Every shadow in a parking lot looked like Evan waiting, smiling that faint, hollow smile. I never sold the SUV. Couldn't bring myself to. It sat in the lot, gathering dust again. But I kept the spare key in my pocket everywhere I went, because I knew one thing for certain. If I hadn't carried it that night, I wouldn't be here to tell this story. I never thought hunting for a cheap apartment would feel like searching for treasure, or like stepping into a trap. It was the summer before my first semester at Westford Community College, and my life was hovering somewhere between freedom and responsibility. I wasn't a kid anymore, but I wasn't entirely independent either. All I wanted was a small place of my own, enough to survive on my part-time paycheck, and maybe a little peace. Money, though, was always a problem. My grocery store job barely covered gas and groceries, let alone rent. My parents could help a little, but they were scraping by themselves. My stepdad worked odd jobs at the mechanic shop, and my mom had a part-time desk job at a dental office. I had a budget in my mind, $700 max, all utilities included. Anything higher would leave me eating instant noodles for a month. For weeks, I scoured Craigslist, local classifieds, and Facebook Marketplace. Most of the listings were scams, blurry photos, impossible fees, or landlords who disappeared the moment you called. A few looked promising, but vanished the moment I tried to schedule a visit. I had started to wonder if finding anything decent within my budget was even possible. Then one night, just as I was scrolling for the 100th time, I saw it. The ad had 3 crisp, clear photos: a bright kitchen with stainless steel appliances, a living room with a neatly arranged sectional, and a bedroom painted a soft yellow with a bed perfectly made. 650, all utilities included, female preferred, quiet household, safe neighborhood. The words practically jumped off the screen. I called the number immediately. A man named Ronald answered, friendly and calm. He claimed he had another potential tenant, but she had backed out. He sounded reasonable, normal, someone you'd trust. He even encouraged me to bring my mom to see the place. Saturday morning came, and the heat was unbearable. My mom drove, iced coffee in hand, while I tried not to melt in the passenger seat. The house was in a quiet residential area, older homes with manicured lawns and little American flags dotting the yards. From the outside, it looked ordinary, pleasant even. Ronald answered the door instantly. He was in his late 30s, neatly dressed in a polo and khakis, hair combed to the side. He smiled warmly and led us inside. The house smelled faintly of lemon cleaner, and everything sparkled. My mom chatted with him about the neighborhood and the rising cost of rent while I lingered behind, taking in the space. Something felt off, too perfect, too staged. There were no personal touches, no photos, books, magazines, or even a coffee mug left out. It was like a showroom. "I'll show you your room," Ronald said. My heart lifted. Maybe this was it. But instead of heading upstairs, he led us down to the basement. My stomach sank. The basement was finished but cramped. Beige carpet, low ceiling, one small ground-level window covered by a thick curtain. He opened a tiny room with a twin bed and a dresser. "This will be yours," he said cheerfully. No closet, no privacy. The bathroom was shared. Across from it, his own room was just an open doorway with a bed and dresser. No door. I forced a smile, trying not to panic. Upstairs, he showed us a few other rooms. Empty, but immaculately clean. No signs anyone actually lived there. One had men's shirts in the closet. "They let me store a few things," Ronald said quickly. My stomach churned. Something wasn't right. On the drive home, I blurted, "I'm not living there." My mom frowned. "But it's clean and cheap. He seems nice." I lied. "He said I'd be upstairs, but they want me down there with him. And those other rooms, they're empty. No one lives there." That night I checked Craigslist. The ad was gone, completely deleted, and a sinking thought settled in my chest. I might have just avoided a trap I didn't fully understand. I couldn't stop thinking about it. The house, the empty rooms, Ronald's wide, too friendly smile. Sleep was uneasy that night, every creak of my apartment sounding like a warning. Part of me wondered if I'd overreacted, if it was just an awkward setup for roommates that hadn't moved in yet. But instinct screamed otherwise. Over the next few days, I noticed something strange. Craigslist listings like that one seemed to vanish overnight. Just bad timing, I told myself. But a small, nagging doubt persisted. What if the other rooms weren't empty? What if there were others? My imagination ran wild. I tried to bury it, focusing on packing for college. I checked other listings. None of them is perfect. None is cheap. I even considered giving up and stretching my budget. But every time I pictured the basement and that open doorway, I shivered. Something about the way the house seemed to wait, silent and pristine, felt wrong. Finally, curiosity got the better of me. I told myself I had to see it one more time, just to prove to myself that nothing was wrong. I drove back to the neighborhood one evening when the sun was low, painting long shadows across the lawns. The house was still there, neat as ever, but the front door was slightly ajar. I froze. My heart raced. I should leave, call the police, or just turn around. But some reckless part of me, maybe the same part that scrolled Craigslist for hours, pushed me forward. Inside it was dark, no lights on. The air smelled faintly of that same lemon cleaner. I whispered, "Hello?" But no one answered. As I moved through the living room, I noticed the furniture had shifted slightly. The sectional was angled differently, the throw pillows rearranged. My pulse quickened. I climbed the stairs to the bedrooms. They were still empty, but then I saw it. A small camera lens, hidden high in the corner of the ceiling. My stomach dropped. Someone had been watching. I ran, out of the house, across the quiet street, and into my car. Hands shaking, I called my mom. No answer. I drove away, vowing never to return. That night, lying in bed, I realized the truth. The house had been a trap, carefully staged, waiting for someone like me. Someone young, trusting, looking for an easy deal. Weeks later, I drove past the neighborhood on a different route. The house was empty again, lights off, door closed. No cars, no signs of life. But the feeling didn't leave me. I would sometimes see flashes in my dreams, a door opening where it shouldn't, a shadow behind a window, and the unmistakable sensation of eyes on me. I never answered a Craigslist listing again. I never went back to that part of town. And even now, years later, I can't shake the thought. If I had said yes, if I had trusted Ronald's smile, I might not be here to tell the story. I wasn't planning on moving out so suddenly, but breakups have a way of ripping the floor out from under you. One week, I was splitting rent with Mark and talking about maybe getting a dog. The next, I was standing in the middle of our half-empty apartment with cardboard boxes stacked around me, realizing I couldn't afford the place alone. I didn't have the luxury of shopping around. My bank account was already groaning from the deposit on a storage unit. That's how I found Michael. His ad was short, a couple of lines buried on Craigslist. 1 bedroom available, shared kitchen and bath, must be neat. No drama. There wasn't even a photo, just an address. But when I called, Michael's voice was calm, almost too calm. He said he worked nights at a hospital and liked things quiet. I figured that was perfect. I needed someone boring, someone predictable, stability. The apartment was an older brick building at the edge of downtown, the kind of place that looked sturdy but forgotten. The hallways smelled faintly of boiled cabbage and industrial cleaner. Michael met me at the door wearing wire-frame glasses and a pale gray sweater, his hair cropped close to his scalp. He didn't smile when he shook my hand, just gave a single nod. "Room's down the hall," he said. His voice was flat but not unfriendly. The room itself wasn't bad. Small, but clean. A narrow window, beige carpet, a closet with sliding doors that stuck on their track. I said I'd take it before I had time to reconsider. Michael laid down rules immediately, as if he'd been rehearsing them. Don't leave dishes in the sink overnight. No loud music. Lock the door when I came in, always. Don't go into his room, ever. That last rule made me pause, but I shrugged it off. Everyone needs privacy. The first week passed quietly enough. Michael worked nights, like he'd said, so I rarely saw him before late afternoon. He moved with a slow, deliberate way, like every action was pre-planned. He labeled everything in the fridge with his name in neat, block letters. If I left so much as a spoon in the sink, by the time I came back from work it would be cleaned, dried, and stacked in its place. I told myself he was just organized. Nothing wrong with that. But little things started nagging at me. The first was the way he looked at me when I mentioned Mark, my ex. We were in the kitchen, and I was still half rambling about the breakup, trying to explain why I'd moved in so suddenly. Michael stood across the counter, stirring tea in a mug that looked almost too delicate for his hands. His eyes didn't blink. "People shouldn't leave," he said quietly. "Not when they've promised to stay." I laughed awkwardly, assuming he meant family or something, but he didn't elaborate. He just kept stirring that tea until I excused myself to my room. Then there were the nights. One Thursday around 2 a.m., I woke to a soft scraping sound. At first I thought it was pipes in the walls, the kind of thing old apartments are full of. But as I lay there listening, I realized it was more deliberate, a slow drag, like wood against wood, just outside my door. I held my breath, waiting for it to stop. Finally, after what felt like forever, I heard the faint creak of Michael's door closing down the hall. The next morning, nothing was out of place. Michael was in the kitchen making oatmeal, his expression blank, as though the night had been perfectly normal. "You sleep okay?" he asked, his voice flat as ever. I lied and said yes. By the second week, I noticed another strange pattern. Every evening before he left for his shift, Michael would stand in the living room with his hands folded in front of him, facing the blank wall opposite the window. He would stay like that for 2 or 3 minutes, not moving, not speaking, not even blinking. I tried not to stare, but it was unnerving. When I finally asked what he was doing, he said, "Centering myself before I leave." That was it. No further explanation. I should have listened to my gut. I should have started looking for another place, no matter how tight money was. But I told myself he was just eccentric, harmless. Still, the unease kept building. One night, after a late shift at work, I came home to find the apartment darker than usual. Michael's door was ajar, which was strange, because he'd been strict about keeping it closed. I froze in the hallway. The rules, his rules, echoed in my head. Don't go into my room, ever. But from where I stood, I could see just past the crack of the door. Inside, the glow of candles flickered across the walls. Shapes, wooden, angular, were arranged on the floor in a pattern I couldn't make sense of. And for just a moment, I swear I heard whispering. Not Michael's voice, but something lower, almost like the hum of electricity. Then the door creaked shut. I didn't even hear Michael cross the room. 1 second, the door was open. The next, it clicked closed, and silence swallowed the hallway. I backed into my room, heart pounding, and locked the door. For hours, I sat on my bed staring at the faint strip of light under the door frame, waiting for a shadow to pass by. But nothing came, and by morning Michael was in the kitchen again, calmly spreading butter on toast, as if none of it had happened. Section 2. The house with its own rules. Michael's house began to feel less like a place I was renting and more like a set of rules written into the walls themselves. He never spelled them out, at least, not at first. But I learned quickly. The first rule was quiet. Michael didn't like noise, especially after dark. He didn't have to tell me. The way he'd pause in the hallway when my TV was playing too loud told me everything. His eyes would settle on my door, long enough for me to mute the sound and hold my breath. Then, just as slowly, he'd move on. The second rule was don't bring people in. I didn't realize how serious he was about it until Evan, my boyfriend at the time, stopped by one evening. He wasn't even staying, just dropping off a few groceries for me because my car had broken down. Michael answered the door before I could. I'll never forget the way he stared at Evan. Not with anger, not with suspicion, but like he was trying to measure something invisible hanging off him. "Not a good idea," Michael said flatly. Then he shut the door in Evan's face. When I opened it again, Evan had already started walking down the path to his car, shaking his head like I'd moved into some madhouse. Michael didn't apologize. He didn't even acknowledge what happened. But later that night, when I stepped out of my room to grab a glass of water, he was waiting at the end of the hallway, arms crossed. "He's not welcome here," he said. I wanted to ask why, but something in his tone froze me. I just nodded and retreated to my room, heart pounding. A week passed. I started noticing the house's third rule. The doors don't always stay shut. My bedroom door had a habit of creaking open during the night. At first, I thought it was the frame settling or maybe the air conditioner blowing it ajar. But sometimes I'd wake up and find it open wider than before, like someone had been standing there watching me. One night, I got up to close it and caught sight of Michael in the hallway. He wasn't moving. He was just standing with his back against the wall, eyes fixed on the gap of my door. "Do you need something?" I asked, voice trembling. He tilted his head slightly. "Do you feel it yet?" "Feel what?" He smiled faintly, the kind of smile that hides more than it shows, then disappeared into his room without another word. It was around then that I started to believe Michael's story about his aunt. He told it over dinner one evening, completely casual, as if it were just small talk. "She lived with us when I was young," he said, cutting his chicken into precise little squares. "My parents said she was unstable. She talked about shadows that clung to people, said she could smell them, taste them almost. I tried to laugh it off, but Michael's tone didn't waver. She said I carried one too, but it never attached to me. Not really. I think it was waiting for someone else. Someone like you. I dropped my fork. What are you talking about? Michael looked me dead in the eyes. You brought it with you. I could tell the first night you walked in. It's not your fault, but it's here now. The room felt 10 degrees colder. My skin prickled with goosebumps. I think you should stop telling me things like that, I managed to whisper. Michael shrugged, finished his meal, and stood up. You'll see. Sleep became impossible after that. Every creak of the house sounded deliberate. Every shadow in the hallway seemed longer, darker. Sometimes, lying in bed, I swore I heard faint whispering, too soft to make out words, but too rhythmic to be random noise. I told myself it was stress. I told myself it was Michael trying to play mind games. But when I woke one morning to find a wooden cross nailed above my doorframe, I knew something had shifted. The cross wasn't new. The wood was splintered, the nails rusted, and it looked like it had been pried off some other wall years ago. Michael! I stormed into the kitchen, holding it in my hands. What the hell is this? He barely looked up from his coffee. Protection. From what? His gaze flicked to me, calm and sharp. From what follows you? That was the breaking point. I told him I was moving out. I didn't care about the deposit or the lease. I couldn't live in a place where my roommate thought I was cursed. Michael didn't argue. He just nodded, like he'd been expecting it. But as I turned to leave, he added quietly, You should hurry. It doesn't like being uprooted. That night was my last in the house. I packed as much as I could and stacked boxes by the door. My plan was to load the car first thing in the morning. But when I returned to my room after a trip down the hall, I froze. 4 black candles sat in the middle of the floor, unlit but arranged in a perfect square. I hadn't put them there. I hadn't even seen them before. For the longest minute of my life, I just stood there staring, waiting for Michael to come out and laugh, to admit it was some sick prank. But the hallway was silent. His door stayed closed. I didn't sleep. I sat awake in my bed, eyes fixed on those candles, too afraid to even touch them. At some point near dawn, I heard Michael's footsteps pause outside my room. You shouldn't leave, he whispered through the door. It will only follow. The candles remained exactly where they were, waiting. And that's when I realized, whatever was happening in that house, I was already caught inside it. I didn't sleep that night. Every time my eyes closed, the image of those black candles burning in the center of my room snapped me awake. Their flames flickered in my memory like they were still alive somewhere behind my eyelids. I lay in the dark, staring at the faint glow of the streetlight seeping through the blinds, listening to Michael moving in his room across the hall. His footsteps were measured, deliberate, as if he knew I was awake and wanted me to hear. I told myself I'd leave at sunrise. I'd pack everything, walk out, and never look back. But as the hours stretched thin and dawn crept closer, a gnawing unease grew inside me. It wasn't just Michael anymore. It was something heavier, colder, as if his words had opened a door in my mind that wouldn't shut. You carry the same darkness. The phrase wouldn't leave me alone. By 6, I gave up pretending to rest. I dragged my suitcase from the corner and shoved clothes into it. My hands trembled so badly, I barely managed to fold anything. The faint smell of smoke still clung to the air, as though the candle wax had seeped into the walls. When I stepped into the hallway, my heart stopped. The cross that Michael had hung above my bedroom door was gone. In its place, scratched directly into the wood with something sharp, were the words, "Don't run." I stumbled back into my room, locking the door behind me. My pulse hammered in my ears. I thought about calling the cops, but what would I even say? That my unstable roommate had scratched a warning into the wall? That he'd lit some candles and stared at me like I was diseased? They'd probably tell me to pack up and move on. And yet, the house didn't feel empty. It felt watched. I forced myself to finish packing, Each zipper felt louder than thunder, each step across the creaking floorboards an announcement of my fear. When I finally opened the door again, Michael was standing at the end of the hall. He wasn't smiling. He wasn't angry. He just looked resigned. "You shouldn't leave," he said softly. I gripped the handle of my suitcase so hard my knuckles turned white. "I'm done. I'm leaving." His eyes dropped to the suitcase, then rose back to meet mine. "I told you. It's not me you should be afraid of. It's what follows you." I swallowed hard, edging toward the stairs. "Stay away from me, Michael." For the first time, he didn't move to block me. He just stepped aside. But as I brushed past him, I heard him whisper, "It'll find you again. It always does." The rest of that morning blurred into motion, dragging my things to the car, slamming doors, peeling out of the driveway. I didn't breathe until I hit the main road and saw Michael's house shrink in the rearview mirror. The relief was instant, but shallow, because in the pit of my stomach, I knew something had shifted. That night, at my friend's apartment where I'd begged for a couch, I tried to laugh it off. Michael was crazy. That's all it was. Just another bad roommate story for the books. But when I finally closed my eyes, the darkness didn't feel empty. It felt occupied. I woke at 3:07 a.m. Sharp. No sound. No light. Just a presence. Heavy. Pressing down on my chest. I couldn't move at first. Frozen in the half-suffocating state between sleep and wakefulness. My eyes darted to the corner of the room, and my blood turned to ice. 4 faint shapes glowed there, small and flickering, like the memory of candles, black flames, swaying where no fire should exist. And behind them, something shifted. Not Michael, not anyone I knew, just a tall, shadowed figure, standing still as stone, watching. When I blinked, it was gone. The corner empty, the air cold and quiet, but the dread didn't leave. Michael's words echoed again. "It'll find you." The days that followed were worse. Electronics flickered when I walked by. My phone glitched, showing my reflection on its black screen even when the camera wasn't on. Friends told me I looked pale, distracted, thinner. I laughed it off, but at night I heard whispers, sometimes my name, sometimes just low murmurs, like a conversation bleeding through the walls. I told myself it was stress, trauma, leftover paranoia from living with a lunatic. But then came the dream. I was back in Michael's house. The candles burned again in my room, but I wasn't alone. A figure stood at the center of them. Its head was bowed, its skin stretched too tight, its hands trembling as if bound to some invisible string. And when it finally looked up, I saw my own face staring back. I woke up screaming. The next morning, my friend told me I'd been talking in my sleep. Begging, actually. She said I kept saying, "Don't let it in, don't let it in." I didn't remember saying it, but I believed her. The longer I stayed away from Michael's house, the clearer it became. He hadn't planted this in me. He'd just recognized it. Whatever followed his aunt, whatever he believed lived in me. It wasn't tied to that house. It was tied to me. And now, there was no escaping it. The last night I wrote this, I lit a single candle on the windowsill of my borrowed room, trying to prove to myself that fire was just fire, wax just wax. The flame bent with the draft, nothing more. I laughed at myself, shaking, ridiculous. Then, without warning, the candle's flame turned black, and I swear I heard Michael's voice, soft and close, whispering through the dark, "I told you." I'd been searching for weeks, scrolling late into the night, half hoping, half dreading what I might find. Apartment hunting wasn't supposed to feel like walking blindfolded into a trap, but Craigslist had a way of turning hope into unease. Too expensive, too far, too good to be true. That night, my laptop screen glowed against the dim light of my tiny bedroom. I was exhausted, slouched against the pillows, when I saw it. Private room for rent. $650 per month, utilities included, quiet neighborhood. The pictures were simple, almost too simple. A white 2-story house, a blurry shot of a kitchen, a small, yellow-painted bedroom with a neatly made bed. The description promised privacy, a safe location, and a responsible, clean roommate. No security deposit. No hidden fees. My breath caught. It was exactly what I'd been looking for. Too perfect. I reread the ad twice, then typed out a quick email just to test the waters. "Hi, I'm interested in the room. Could I come by to see it this week?" The response came less than an hour later. "Hi, I'm Caleb. The room's still available. Come by tomorrow evening, around 7. Here's the address, Grove Street." Quick reply, polite tone, no fuss. My nerves tangled with excitement. Finally, maybe this was it. I told Megan, my roommate, about it the next morning over coffee. She raised an eyebrow. "Craigslist? Really?" I shrugged. "The price is right, and the photos don't look like total scams." She didn't look convinced, but she agreed to come with me. That was our rule. Never go alone. Never take unnecessary risks. Craigslist wasn't forgiving when you got it wrong. The following evening, we drove out to Grove Street. November had stripped the trees bare, and the air bit sharp against our faces as we walked up to the house. The siding was white, but the paint peeled in spots. The shutters leaned crooked, and the porch sagged slightly beneath our steps. No lights glowed inside, even though the sky had already gone dark. "This feels off," Megan whispered. Before I could answer, the front door opened. A man stood there, maybe mid-30s, dark hair, wearing a faded sweatshirt and jeans. His smile was practiced, polite. "You must be Emily and Megan," he said smoothly. "Come in." The air inside smelled faintly of cigarettes and artificial lemon cleaner. The foyer was narrow, the walls bare. To the right, I caught sight of a living room with a single recliner facing the wall. No TV, no decorations, no clutter, just emptiness. "Give me a second to check if the room's ready," Caleb said, gesturing toward the stairs. He disappeared down the hall without waiting for us to answer. Megan frowned. "Why wouldn't it be ready? He invited us." I didn't answer. My attention was fixed on the flickering light overhead, the strange silence of the house, the way it seemed more like a stage set than a home. When Caleb returned, his smile hadn't shifted. "The room's actually in the guest house out back," he said lightly. "More private, with its own entrance. You'll love it." "Guest house?" Megan echoed, skeptical. "Yeah," Caleb chuckled, but the sound was thin. "Thing is, my neighbor's been bugging me to rent it to her. She's nosy, always watching. So when we head out, I need you to walk quickly so she doesn't notice. I'll go first. Wave you over when it's clear." Megan and I exchanged a glance. Something prickled in my chest. He slipped out the back door before we could respond. Through the small window, I caught movement. Not Caleb. 3 men walked toward the detached garage. They weren't neighbors carrying tools or paint cans. They weren't tenants. They moved in a straight line, silently, with intent. I felt my throat tighten. Megan's eyes widened. That was all it took. "Let's go," I whispered. We turned and walked quickly out the front door, down the porch steps, and toward the car. My pulse pounded with every step, but I forced myself not to run. Only when we were inside, doors locked, engine started, did I breathe again. 2 blocks away, my phone buzzed. "Caleb." I ignored it. He called again. Against my better judgment, I answered. "Where'd you go?" His voice was sharp, no trace of politeness now. "I told you to wait." "We decided it's not a good fit," I said, forcing calm into my voice. "You didn't even look at it," he snapped. "Do you think you're too good for this place? Do you know how many people—" I hung up. Megan drove the rest of the way home without a word, her knuckles white on the steering wheel. The farther we got, the more I could breathe. But deep down, I knew we hadn't just walked away from a bad rental. We had walked away from something far worse, and part of me was terrified that it wasn't over. The next morning, sunlight streamed through my window, but it didn't warm me. I barely slept, and when I did, I dreamt of muffled footsteps circling my bed. Mr. Rayner greeted me in the kitchen with his usual tight smile, already dressed in his pressed slacks and neat sweater. He poured himself coffee but didn't offer me any. Instead, he said casually, "You haven't seen the guest house yet, have you? I should give you a tour later." The way he said it sent a prickling sensation through me. His tone was too eager, like he'd been waiting for me to ask about it. I forced a polite laugh and replied, "Sure, maybe later." But my curiosity grew. The guest house sat at the back of the property, a small, separate building with shutters always drawn. I'd noticed a heavy padlock on the door when I first arrived, but I assumed it was for storage. That afternoon, when I thought Mr. Rayner had left for errands, I stepped outside. The air was damp, carrying the earthy smell of wet leaves. Gravel crunched under my shoes as I crossed the yard. Standing before the guest house, I felt an odd stillness in the air, as though the birds had stopped singing. The padlock gleamed, new and heavy. My hand hovered over it, but before I could touch it, I caught movement out of the corner of my eye. One of the shutters twitched. Someone, or something, was inside. I jumped back, heart hammering. Then a voice called from the main house. "Curious, aren't we?" Mr. Rayner stood on the porch, hands in his pockets, smiling too wide. My throat went dry. "I was just admiring the place," I stammered. He chuckled softly, shaking his head. "That building isn't safe. Old wiring, unstable floors. Best to keep away." His gaze didn't leave me as I walked back to the main house, and I swear I could feel it drilling into the back of my skull. That night, the noises returned. Only this time, they weren't muffled. At first, it was scratching in the walls. Then came the soft knock, knock, knock on my bedroom door. I sat up, clutching the blanket, heart in my throat. "Mr. Rayner?" I whispered. The knocking stopped. When I finally mustered the courage to open the door, the hallway was empty. Shadows stretched long and deep, as though the bulbs above had dimmed just for this moment. I hurried back into my room and shoved a chair under the handle. Sleep came in restless bursts. Somewhere in the haze of night, I thought I heard a voice whisper, not outside but right by my ear. "Don't look at the windows." The next day I decided I couldn't stay much longer. I packed a small bag, but when I stepped into the hallway, I froze. Every single door in the house, the bathroom, the closets, the basement, was slightly ajar, like someone had been walking through them all night, opening one by one. I swallowed hard and called out, "Mr. Rayner?" No answer. I found him outside, raking leaves near the guest house. His face lit up when he saw my bag. "Going somewhere?" I forced a smile. "Just a weekend trip. Friend's place." He studied me, his eyes narrowing, then slowly nodded. "That's nice. But before you leave, come help me with something." He pointed toward the guest house. Every nerve in my body screamed no, but my legs carried me forward anyway, as if denying him would snap whatever thin thread of civility he still pretended to have. The padlock was gone. "Go on," he said, motioning for me to open the door. The hinges groaned as I pushed it open. The smell hit me first, damp wood, mold, and something metallic, like rust or blood. Inside, the walls were covered in photographs, hundreds of them, all different people, all standing stiffly in the same living room I had slept in last night. Some were faded and yellowed, others recent. My stomach turned when I spotted my own face among them, a photo that hadn't been there yesterday. Why is this here?" My voice shook. Mr. Rayner stepped in behind me, his smile never wavering. "I like to keep memories of my tenants. But these people, where are they now?" His smile widened, stretching almost unnaturally. "Gone, but not forgotten." My breath came fast and shallow. The room seemed to close in, the walls leaning forward. I backed up toward the door, but Mr. Rayner blocked the exit with his frame. "You're special," he whispered, his eyes gleaming. "You're going to stay longer than the others." That night, I didn't sleep at all. I kept the lights on, every muscle in my body tense. My bag sat ready by the door. I knew if I stayed another night, I wouldn't make it out. I only needed to survive until morning. Then I'd run, no matter what it took. But as the clock struck 3 a.m., the sound of keys jingled outside my door. The chair wedged under the handle trembled as the knob turned, slowly, deliberately. And then, in the stillness, his whisper seeped through the crack of the door. "You don't belong outside. You belong here, with me." I never thought silence could scream so loud. That's what I remember most about stepping into the guest house. It was as if the air had been holding its breath for years. The walls seemed thinner than skin. The floor sagged beneath each step. And the smell. It was damp, metallic, like rainwater mixed with rust. "Just ahead," the landlord whispered, his voice softer now, almost reverent. He carried no lantern, no flashlight. Yet somehow he moved like he knew every inch of this place in the dark. I fumbled with the beam of my phone light, sweeping it across the room. Dust, cobwebs, a toppled chair. And then, just for a second, the light caught something wet on the far wall. Dark streaks running downward, too fresh to be dust. I froze. "What is that?" I asked, my voice quivering. The landlord turned slowly, his face slipping into a smile that was wrong in every possible way. His lips stretched too far. His eyes gleamed with something wild. "Proof," he said, "that the house remembers." I should have run then. I should have turned and sprinted back to the main house, packed my bags, and left that cursed place in the rearview mirror. But I didn't, because my body wouldn't listen. It was as if the walls themselves had pinned me there, watching, waiting. The landlord gestured toward a narrow hallway at the back. "They always end up there," he whispered. My throat tightened. "They." I forced myself to speak. "Look, this isn't working out. I don't want to stay here. I'll pay for the week, but I'm leaving." "Leaving?" His smile faltered, twisting into something uglier. "No one leaves without the house's permission." The words landed heavy, like a verdict. And then, as if to punctuate his claim, the door behind me slammed shut. I spun around, but there was no lock, no handle, just blank wood, where the knob had been moments earlier. I backed away, my phone shaking in my grip. Its light trembled across the floor, catching glimpses of what I thought were stains. But now I realized they were carvings. Scratches dug deep into the wooden planks. Desperate gouges. Fingernails. The landlord was closer now, his voice a murmur I could barely hear over the blood rushing in my ears. They all said the same thing. "I'll leave. But the house doesn't like lies." I bolted down the hallway, my shoes slipping on the warped boards. The narrow passage seemed endless, stretching longer with each frantic step. My phone's beam cut through the dark, landing on something at the end of the hall, an open doorway. I rushed through it, gasping, and stumbled into a room that stole the breath from my lungs. It was filled with beds, 5 of them, lined side by side like a dormitory, but each one was occupied. Figures lay beneath the sheets, perfectly still. My light shook as I inched closer, and my stomach turned when I saw their faces, sunken, gray, skin clinging to bone. Not decomposed, not exactly, but drained, like they had been emptied of something essential. And their eyes, every single one of them had eyes wide open, glassy, staring at the ceiling. I gagged, slapping a hand over my mouth. My phone slipped, clattering to the floor, its beam rolling across the faces of the dead. And then, I swear on whatever's left of my soul, one of them blinked. I screamed. Behind me, the landlord's voice echoed through the hall. "The house chose you." I scrambled for my phone, grabbed it, and ran. I didn't care where, I just needed out. The hallway twisted, bent in ways it shouldn't have, doors appearing where walls had been seconds earlier. My lungs burned, my legs screamed, but I kept going. Finally, I burst into the main room of the guest house again. The streaks on the wall were brighter now, fresher, dripping down in slow rivulets. My stomach churned when I realized it wasn't rust, it was blood. The landlord stood in the center of the room, his arms spread wide as if embracing the house itself. "You hear it, don't you? The walls, the floors, they're alive." "They're hungry!" The floor groaned beneath me, boards buckling as if something massive pressed upward from below. I stumbled backward, clutching the nearest piece of furniture for balance. But the chair dissolved under my grip, its wood collapsing into dust. I ran for the door, slamming my fists against it. It didn't budge. The windows were the same, sealed, warped, their glass rippling like water when I struck it. Despair clawed at my chest. "Why me?" I shouted, voice breaking. The landlord tilted his head. "Because you believed it was safe. That's the sweetest kind of prey." And then the floor gave way. I plunged into blackness, my scream swallowed whole. The air rushed past me, thick and damp, until I landed hard on something soft. For a moment I lay there, disoriented, before my phone's light flickered back on. I wished it hadn't. I was lying on a mound of bodies, fresh ones. Their faces were twisted in terror, their hands reaching upward, frozen in their final pleas. The smell of decay wrapped around me like a noose. I scrambled off the pile, gagging, and shone my light around. The basement stretched farther than the house itself should allow, a cavern of flesh and shadows, and everywhere, on the walls, the ceiling, the floor, were carvings, names, hundreds, maybe thousands. I staggered toward the far end, desperate for any way out. That's when I saw it. A door. Not wood this time, but iron, blackened and scarred. I yanked it open and stumbled into the night air. I was outside, behind the guest house. For a moment, relief surged through me. I could see the road in the distance, the faint glow of streetlights. Salvation. But when I turned back, the house was gone. The field stretched empty behind me, grass swaying in the night breeze. No guest house, no main house, just darkness. I ran. I didn't look back. Even now, days later, I don't know if I ever really escaped. Every night, I wake to the sound of floorboards creaking, walls groaning, as if the house followed me. Sometimes I swear I see the landlord smile in the corner of my room, and sometimes I hear the names, whispered in the dark. I don't know how much longer I can keep running, because deep down, I know the truth. The house chose me. I had been chasing that record for almost 6 years, and when the listing popped up late one Thursday night, I barely hesitated before sending a message. The photos were grainy, like they'd been taken with a flip phone, but even blurred, I recognized the cover. The Hollow Pines Sessions, a bootleg pressing only whispered about among collectors. It was the crown jewel of horrorcore vinyl, supposedly cursed, though of course I never put any stock in that. What mattered was the value. Owning it would make me untouchable in the forums. The seller responded within minutes. His message was brief. Come in person. No shipping. Cash only. Friday night, 9 p.m. Farmhouse, Route 6. Don't be late. Most people would have thought twice. The hour, the location, the fact that he insisted on cash, it all screamed scam. But to me, it felt authentic. Record collectors can be weird, secretive. Sometimes they just want to see who's worthy of holding their treasure. I convinced myself this was one of those times. Friday night, I drove out alone. The farther I went, the thinner the traffic became until it felt like the road belonged to me. Route 6 stretched into a dark, yawning line of asphalt with no streetlights. The sky pressed down low, the horizon swollen with storm clouds. My phone had dropped service miles back, but I still had the seller's hand-drawn directions. Take the third left after the rusted silo, follow dirt road until the fence with 3 broken boards. I spotted the silo easily. It leaned like a dying tooth against the fields. Turning left, my tires rumbled onto a dirt path that seemed more like a scar cut into the earth than a road. Weeds slapped at the sides of my car as I crawled along. After maybe half a mile, I saw the fence, just like he'd described. The boards hung loose, flapping in the wind. The farmhouse sat beyond, hulking against the night. Its windows glowed a faint amber, like lanterns suffocated by dust. The place looked abandoned at first, its paint peeled into gray strips, the porch sagging with rot. Yet, a faint music trickled out. It wasn't modern. It sounded warped, warbling, like an old gramophone playing too slow. My heart thudded. Was he already spinning the record? Had I walked into a once-in-a-lifetime experience? I parked under a tree and grabbed the envelope of cash. The air smelled thick, earthy, with a sour tang that made me wrinkle my nose. As I climbed the steps, the boards creaked under my weight. Before I could knock, the door opened. The man who stood there was not what I'd expected. His frame was gaunt, skin stretched tight over bone. His hair was thin and colorless, his eyes pale blue, almost milky. He wore suspenders over a threadbare shirt, as though frozen in another decade. When he smiled, I noticed 2 things. His teeth were yellowed, and he had far too many of them, crowded together in uneven rows. "You're right on time," he rasped, stepping aside. "Come in. Been waiting." I hesitated, but the music tugged at me. It was clearer inside, echoing from deeper in the house. Against my better judgment, I crossed the threshold. The door closed with a heavy thud behind me. The hallway smelled of mildew and something faintly metallic like rust. Old wallpaper peeled in strips, revealing wood underneath. The floor sagged in places. My eyes darted to the shadows, where shapes seemed to linger. He gestured with a spindly hand. "Records are in the sitting room. Through here." I followed, clutching the envelope tighter. The sitting room was cluttered with stacks of vinyl, leaning like unstable towers. Dust coated everything, and yet the record player in the corner spun with perfect smoothness. A black disc rotated on it, releasing that warped melody. I leaned closer to the spinning label, but the letters had been scratched away. Still, I recognized the haunting tune. My pulse quickened. It was the Hollow Pines Sessions. The man watched me, his grin unbroken. Rare, isn't it? Been in the family a long time. Only plays for those who come looking. His choice of words unsettled me. In the family a long time. Only plays for those who come looking? It sounded rehearsed, almost ritualistic. I cleared my throat. I brought the cash. A deal's a deal. He chuckled, dry as sandpaper. A deal? Yes. But first, listen. It doesn't sound the same to everyone. That's why it chooses. The song swelled, its warbling voice almost human now, like someone buried underwater, trying to sing through the surface. I felt the hairs rise on my arms. My gut twisted. Something wasn't right. I should have walked out. But instead I sank into the moth-eaten chair across from the turntable. That's when I realized. The front door had locked. I hadn't heard it, but I saw the bolt now slid firmly in place. And for the first time, I noticed the shadows weren't just shadows. Shapes leaned against the walls, too still, too human. My throat went dry. I wasn't alone in the farmhouse. I woke up the next morning feeling like my skin didn't fit me right, as if it had shrunk overnight. The air in the room was stale, damp in a way I hadn't noticed before. My throat was dry, but it wasn't thirst. It was that kind of dryness you get after sleeping in a place that doesn't want you there. I sat up, rubbing the grit from my eyes, and realized something was wrong. My bag, the one I'd dropped near the desk, wasn't where I'd left it. It had been shoved against the far wall, tipped onto its side, with the zipper halfway open. My clothes were still inside, but everything was folded wrong. Too neat, like someone had taken each piece out, and then carefully put them back. I told myself maybe I'd done it in a fog before collapsing last night. Maybe I'd wandered half asleep, but the idea rang hollow in my head. The floor creaked when I stood, more than it should have. The sound wasn't just wood bending under weight. It was something deeper, almost like a groan. I froze, listening, and for a second I swore the house inhaled. The air shifted against my skin, cool then warm, like a breath passing over me. I tried to shake it off. Get a grip, I muttered, yanking my bag upright. But when I checked the zipper, I noticed something I couldn't brush away. A single strand of hair, long, black, and definitely not mine, was caught in the teeth of the zipper. I don't live with anyone. The kitchen seemed like the best place to gather myself, so I headed down the narrow hallway. The morning light filtering through the cracked blinds looked pale, sickly, as if the sun had lost some of its power before reaching me. The house smelled faintly of wet earth, stronger than last night, and underneath it lingered a bitter tang like rust. On the counter sat a coffee cup, clean, dry, placed neatly on a saucer. I hadn't unpacked the kitchen yet. I didn't touch it. I couldn't. Instead, I forced myself to open the fridge, half expecting something worse to be waiting inside. But it was empty, except for the faint hum of the motor. The sound filled the silence too much, as if it were trying to drown out something else. I needed to get out, at least for a little while, clear my head. When I opened the front door, the porch steps groaned like they hadn't been touched in decades. The air outside felt heavy, pressing against my lungs. Even though the sky looked clear, the woods stretched in every direction, silent except for the occasional flicker of wind rattling branches. I walked for maybe an hour, following the gravel road that wound away from the house. The crunch of my footsteps echoed strangely, too sharp, as though the trees were listening. I didn't see another soul, not a car, not a bird, nothing. Just the endless stillness of woods that seemed to bend slightly inward the further I went, crowding the road like they wanted to swallow it whole. Eventually, I turned back. The road felt longer than before, as if it stretched behind me while I wasn't looking. When I finally spotted the house again, relief didn't come. It looked wrong in daylight. Smaller, hunched, like it was shrinking into itself. The windows reflected the sky, but in the glass I thought I saw a smear of movement, as if someone had just pulled back from looking out. Inside, the air was worse, heavier. I realized with a cold twist in my gut that it carried the faintest hint of mildew and something sweeter underneath, like rotting fruit. I gagged. The stench hadn't been there when I left. The coffee cup was gone. I checked the counters, the sink, even opened cupboards, though my hands shook so hard I nearly dropped the doors off their hinges. Nothing. It wasn't there. That's when I heard it. The low, steady sound of footsteps above me. My head snapped toward the ceiling. The rhythm was slow, deliberate, pacing across the upstairs hallway. My heart thudded so hard I could feel it in my throat. The house had been silent when I left. There was no one there. No one should be there. I grabbed the first thing I could reach, a heavy iron pan from a box I hadn't unpacked yet, and crept toward the stairs. Each step I took felt like sinking deeper into water. My chest tightened, my breath shallow, ears straining for every sound. The footsteps had stopped by the time I reached the landing, leaving only silence so thick it buzzed in my skull. The hallway stretched long, darker than it should have been. The doors on either side were closed, except one. The door at the far end was cracked open, just enough to show a sliver of shadow inside. I tightened my grip on the pan and moved closer, the floor whining beneath me. The smell grew stronger, sweet and foul, making bile rise in my throat. When I pushed the door open, the room was empty. It was just four walls, bare except for peeling wallpaper and a single chair in the corner. On the chair sat the coffee cup, full this time. Steam curled from its surface, faint and gray, filling the air with a scent like burned sugar. I didn't touch it. Couldn't. I backed out, every nerve in my body screaming, and slammed the door shut. The echo carried too long, like the sound had gotten stuck in the walls. Downstairs again, I locked myself in the living room. My hands shook as I slid the bolt across the door, though a small voice in my head mocked the effort. Locks didn't matter if the house itself was against me. I sat on the couch for what felt like hours, listening to the wood groan and settle, trying to convince myself it was just an old building, just tricks of exhaustion and stress. But when I finally closed my eyes, drifting in and out of uneasy sleep, a sound pulled me back, a whisper, right against my ear, breathing my name. I don't know how long I sat there on the cold wooden floor, back pressed against the wall, staring at the empty mattress where the last of the strangers had disappeared. My phone was useless now, just a dead weight in my pocket. The cabin was quiet, too quiet, like the air had been sucked out of it. Even the wind outside had gone still, leaving me alone in a silence so thick it pressed against my ears. But the quiet didn't last. It began with a low creak, the kind you hear when an old house shifts under its own weight. Only, this wasn't the house. It was coming from the walls, a deep groan of timber stretching like it was breathing. My skin prickled as the sound rolled around me, circling, growing louder until I swore the very bones of the cabin were alive. I forced myself to stand, legs trembling. The boards groaned under my weight like they resented me. Something in my gut screamed that I had to leave. Now. I stumbled to the front door, grabbed the handle and yanked. It didn't budge. I tried again, rattling it so hard the frame shook, but the lock held fast. I hadn't locked it. I knew I hadn't. Then, from behind me came the whisper, "Stay." I froze, every muscle locking up. The voice was low, guttural, like the rasp of someone with a throat full of gravel. Slowly, against my better judgment, I turned. The strangers were back, all three of them, standing shoulder to shoulder in the hallway, watching me. Their faces were still obscured, their clothes damp and stained like before. But something about them had changed. They weren't flickering shadows now. They were solid, real. And their eyes, if you could call them eyes, were dark voids, empty sockets that seemed to pull the light straight out of the air. My body acted before my brain could catch up. I ran. I bolted down the hall, past the figures, past the rotting wallpaper that seemed to curl tighter as I moved, and toward the back door of the cabin. It was locked too. I slammed my shoulder into it, pain shooting down my arm, but the door refused to give. I spun, looking for another way out, and saw the strangers drifting closer. They didn't walk. They just slid, gliding along the floor as if gravity meant nothing to them. "Why me?" I shouted, my voice cracking. "What do you want?" They didn't answer. They didn't have to. The way they reached for me, pale fingers stretching long and skeletal, told me everything. They wanted me. I scrambled into the kitchen, yanking drawers open, searching for anything I could use. My hand closed around a rusty kitchen knife, the blade dull but heavy. I held it out in front of me, shaking so bad it might as well have been a twig. "Stay back," I warned. The strangers didn't flinch. They closed in, filling the kitchen doorway, their black eyes boring into me. I felt the air thicken, pressing against my chest, making it hard to breathe. The walls seemed to swell and contract with their presence, as if the entire cabin pulsed to their rhythm. And then, one of them spoke again. "Join." The word rattled inside my skull, louder than any shout. I stumbled backward, my knife clattering to the floor, and slammed against the counter. I could feel them inside my head, pushing, pulling, trying to twist me into something I didn't understand. My vision blurred, the edges of the room warping like melted film. I ran again. I don't even remember deciding to move. I just remember my legs carrying me up the stairs 2 at a time, the sound of my ragged breath echoing louder than the creaks beneath me. At the top, I threw myself into the first room I saw and slammed the door. The bedroom. The same room where they'd first appeared. The same room where they'd disappeared. The air here was suffocating, thicker than anywhere else in the cabin. My ears popped like I'd climbed a mountain. The mattress sat in the center of the room, rumpled and damp, as if someone had just been lying there. The wallpaper peeled in long strips, curling into patterns that almost looked like faces. And on the floor, scratched deep into the wood, was a single word: stay. The door rattled behind me, the sound of hands pounding, pushing, clawing. I braced my back against it, but it was like holding back a flood. The wood bowed inward, dust raining down from the ceiling. "Let me out!" I screamed, even though I knew no one was out there but them. Then the door stopped shaking. Silence again. I didn't trust it. I didn't move. Minutes dragged by, or maybe seconds. I couldn't tell anymore. And then, slowly, the mattress sank, like invisible weight pressed down on it. An indentation formed, the shape of a body lying there, head turning to face me. I couldn't take it anymore. I lunged for the window, slamming the heel of my hand against the glass. Once, twice. A crack spidered across the surface, then another. On the third hit, it shattered, spraying shards across the floor. I didn't care about the cuts that ripped across my palms as I pulled myself through. The cold night air hit me like a slap. I dropped to the ground outside, knees buckling on the damp earth, and scrambled away from the cabin. I didn't look back. Not once. I just ran, through the trees, branches tearing at my arms, mud sucking at my shoes, until my lungs burned and my vision blurred with tears. I don't remember how I found the road. Maybe it found me. But when I stumbled onto the asphalt, collapsing against the gravel shoulder, I knew I wasn't safe. Not really. Because as I lay there, gasping for breath, I heard it. The whisper. So soft, it might have been the wind. Stay. And I realized with a sick twist in my gut that I hadn't escaped the cabin at all. The cabin had escaped with me. I've always had a complicated relationship with the internet. I use it for work, for mindless scrolling, and for the occasional guilty pleasure of reading creepy stories late at night. You know the ones, the no-sleep type tales that pretend to be true but are clearly fiction, written for cheap thrills. They were fun, in a disposable way, like watching a horror movie with the lights off. I never thought one of those stories would be about me. It started on an ordinary Tuesday evening. I had just gotten home from work, the kind of exhausting day where I didn't even bother turning on the TV. Instead, I made myself a cup of coffee, 2 sugars, a splash of oat milk, the way I always do, and sat by the window with the latest novel I was trying to force myself through. A storm had rolled in, fat drops of rain rattling against the glass, and I thought, perfect night for spooky stories. I opened my laptop, navigated to one of those forums, and clicked on a post titled, "The Man by the Window." The first few sentences made my stomach tighten. She always makes her coffee the same way. 2 sugars, a splash of oat milk. She doesn't even taste it anymore. It's ritual. Tonight, she sits by her window pretending to read, though her eyes wander to the storm instead. She tells herself she likes the rain, but really, she just doesn't want to feel so alone. I froze. That was, word for word, what I had just done. The coffee, the book, the storm outside. Even the part about staring out the window more than actually reading. It was so spot on, it felt like someone was watching me. My first thought was stupidly rational. Coincidence. Maybe it just described the kind of generic evening plenty of people have. Coffee, rain, a book. It's not exactly unusual, but as I kept reading, the details got sharper. The scar on her wrist itches when she's nervous. She rubs it without realizing. The pale line from an accident she never talks about. But I remember. I always remember. I slammed my laptop shut so fast the sound echoed in the quiet apartment. My wrist burned under the sudden attention, and before I even realized what I was doing, my fingers had drifted there, tracing the line. That scar wasn't common knowledge. No one had ever written about it. Hell, most people in my life had forgotten it existed. I'd fallen through a glass door as a kid, and it left a mark that refused to fade, but it wasn't something strangers online should know about. I got up, flicked on every light in the apartment, and told myself it was just a story. Maybe I was reading into it. Maybe it was some bizarre coincidence. But when I opened my laptop again later that night, the post was gone, completely vanished, not even cached. It was like it had never been there at all. That should have been the end of it. Just some freaky glitch, a weird overlap of detail, a product of my overtired brain. But then, 2 nights later, another post appeared. This one was called "The Woman Who Never Locks Her Window," and I knew before I even clicked it that it was going to be about me. I told myself not to read it. I even hovered my cursor over the little X in the corner of the browser, but my hand wouldn't move. My chest was tight, my mouth dry, and my brain whispered the same thing over and over. If it's about you, you need to know. So I clicked. She tells herself the neighborhood is safe, that no one ever comes down this street. That's why she leaves the window unlocked, cracked just enough for air. She doesn't realize that's how I watch her. She doesn't realize she's never really alone. My stomach lurched. I turned to look at my living room window. It was cracked open an inch, just like it always was on mild nights. I had been doing that for years, long before reading this post, but seeing it written out in front of me felt like someone had peeled back my walls and peered into the most private corners of my life. I slammed the window shut and locked it. Then I locked the door for good measure, even though it had already been locked. When I came back, my laptop screen had changed. The post was gone again. The forum page was empty, like it had been wiped. I didn't sleep that night. Every creak of the building made me jump. Every gust of wind against the window sounded like someone tapping trying to get in. The next day at work, I tried to tell myself it was just a prank. Maybe someone hacked my computer. Maybe some jerk thought it would be funny to freak me out. But that night, I couldn't resist checking again. Another post was waiting. She knows I'm here. My hands trembled as I opened it. She reads these posts every night, eyes wide, heart racing. She thinks locking the window will save her. But locks are only a comfort, not a barrier. She still hasn't noticed the camera. She still hasn't looked closely enough. I shoved my chair back so hard it clattered against the floor. Camera? My eyes darted around the room, wild, scanning the walls, the bookshelf, the TV. My laptop camera? Of course. I slapped a sticky note over it and shoved the whole thing shut. But even then, the words haunted me. She still hasn't noticed the camera. What if it wasn't the laptop? I tore my apartment apart that night, pulled books from shelves, lifted couch cushions, unscrewed smoke detectors, even ripped apart a potted plant I loved because the paranoia was unbearable. I found nothing. By 4 a.m., I was sitting in the middle of my wrecked living room, shaking, exhausted, every muscle in my body on edge. And then I heard it, a scrape, from the other side of the window, slow, deliberate. I didn't move, I didn't breathe. I just stared at the locked glass, waiting. The scrape came again, and then nothing. I didn't sleep for 2 nights after that. The posts became a ritual. I told myself not to look, but I always did. They always disappeared after I read them, and no one else ever mentioned them, like I was the only person who could see them. Each one was worse than the last. She checks her locks 3 times before bed. She whispers to herself that it's safe. She doesn't see the shadow under the door. She eats cold cereal at midnight when she can't sleep. She spills a drop of milk on the counter and doesn't wipe it up. She never notices me standing behind her reflection in the dark glass. I couldn't take it anymore. I stopped sleeping altogether. My apartment was trashed, every drawer pulled out, every corner checked again and again. Friends stopped texting me back when I cancelled plans. Work became impossible. I'd sit at my desk, staring at my computer, waiting for the next post to appear. Then came the final one. The post that ends her. I should have slammed the laptop shut. I should have run out of the apartment and never looked back. But my hands moved on their own, like they didn't belong to me anymore. She doesn't realize this is the last thing she'll ever read. She doesn't realize I'm already inside. She won't even hear the door open. She won't feel the knife until it's too late. She'll just wonder for the briefest second how I always knew her so well. My blood turned to ice. I whipped around, scanning the apartment, heart jackhammering in my chest. The door was closed. The windows were locked. And then, the sound. The creak of the floorboards. Behind me. I didn't look. I couldn't. My vision tunneled, the words on the laptop screen blurring as my body froze in absolute terror. The last thing I remember was the smell. Metallic, sharp, and the way the cursor blinked at the end of the sentence, like it was waiting for me to type the ending.